Okay. First time streaming, so hopefully everybody can see me and we're here. All right, I got a confirmation from Fernando that there's somebody here. As you'll see, there's a lot of technology to set this up. Turned out to be a little bit bigger of a book club than I thought it was going to be. So glad to have all the pieces together. Glad to have you here. Yes, at least we have two people. It's perfect. So I won't take up too much of your Sunday. I'm super thrilled you're here, and let's just jump right into it. Let's flip over here. Still getting used to the stream. All right, now we got everything. We got everything set up. All right. Yes, three's a crowd. Perfect. So welcome to the inaugural, book club that I'm doing. I got way more reception than I thought it was. I thought it was going to be one or two people, and we were going to do a Zoom or Google Meet type of just talk and chat. But with the amount of people that decided to express interest, it turned out we needed to do something different because we wouldn't be able to include everybody all at once. So now we're going to do this. We're going to do this live stream that's recorded, and we're going to do the discourse and make it async. And so hop in right into it. Welcome. This is our agenda for today. We'll go through book club logistics, especially since this is our first meeting, and you don't know what exactly is going to happen. I don't even know what's exactly going to happen. This is an experiment for me as well. We're definitely going to talk about the introduction chapter. That's the whole point. We're going to chat about this book. We'll go through the group discussion from Discourse. I saw folks that posted, which I'm really excited about. There's already some ideas that I didn't even pick up when I read the chapter that I got from the people that had shared on Discourse, what they got from the chapter. So already sort of success there. Actually, definitely a success there that at least I've learned more than I would have on my own. And then we're going to I'll try and do a live Q&A through the chat, but I'll explain more about that in a second. Oops. I'm still figuring out all this OBS Studio stuff, so you're going to see me screw up a little bit here and there, but we'll get through it. All right. Welcome to the book club. I think I've said that 4 times now, so hopefully you feel very, very welcome. Hello from Brazil. Wow, I'm glad to see that we've got multiple hemispheres represented. So here's what's happening. If you're here now, and it's an open session for us to talk about the book, you have the chat box. We'll talk about this, but in the near future, let's read another chapter. There's going to be more details in the YouTube description. And then if you're in the far future, because again, this is a recorded stream that maybe you're either watching in the, today or tomorrow, or maybe you're watching a year from now. This was a book club that took place in 2022. So there's going to be a whole series in a playlist, and then you can check out that playlist to see all of the discussion that occurred. Book club logistics. First off, thank you so much for your patience with dealing all of this. Your patience with the discourse permissions that I had inadvertently made too restrictive. And then your patience even today as I try out this live stream format, probably click some wrong buttons, turn my video off accidentally, look at my multiple screens. There's been a lot of technology to get this whole thing running. This is the current list, and piecing it all together has been a challenge. So if you see, the biggest thing is the ask I have for you. If you see anything wrong, if you notice you can't access something, if you notice that when I sent out an email yesterday, you couldn't view the posts that I had initially because I had, again, made the discourse too restrictive, just let me know. And then if you think anything could be better, if you think the audio could be better, if you think the presentation could be better, please send me feedback. Like any statistician, when you have data points, it makes it much easier to figure out what's going on or infer what you need to do better. So I think most of you have my email. There's the Discourse, there's Twitter, there's this chat. However you can, let me know how we can make this better for you and the folks around, and we will certainly try and do so. This is, again, a live experiment where we're going to try and do this async book club where we maximize the amount of learning, not just for me, but for everybody. One thing I'll talk about here, today's live sync is going to be pretty one directional. It'll just be me talking to you largely in just a chat. I know that's it has a little bit too much asymmetry. So in the next book club sessions, I'm going to try and use additional technologies like StreamYard or Restream or something. I got to figure it out so we can have folks come in and have more of a discussion. I'll see what it takes, but that'll be something to look forward to, and that'll be learning for myself in using all of these fancy things that we've got these days. So with that, let's just jump straight into the chapter. What I'll do is I'll talk about what I read and then a little bit of my experience, and then we will jump into what the other folks have said as well. So for me, I saw three big things in this chapter. There was the author background. So Scott talks about where he came from and his personal motivation for getting from poetry into his econometrics profession as a professor. And then he also talks a lot about the field of causal inference and sort of how it grew over time, some of the motivations for that as well. He then talks a lot about causal inference, like what it is, why causal inference, what makes it useful, some of the challenges about causal inference, and then some technical notes in the conclusion that we'll talk about as well. I'm going to post one figure from the chapter that I think is a nice figure. As somebody that's now written a book, figures are some of the hardest parts to make because there's so much you can do. With text, you really can just write a sentence, and sure, you can be descriptive. But with figures, it's much more challenging because you have so many constraints. There's the size, there's the placement, there's what it's going to be. And I actually thought this was a really nice figure because it's not mathematical, and you got artwork from somebody, but it definitely illustrates what his text was about causation and how you may not be able to even see the signals that are going into it. If you haven't read the chapter yet, he provides an analogy. I don't know if you can see my mouse. I don't think so. He provides an analogy how if you're sailing a boat, the wind is coming one way, the boat is moving a certain direction, and the rudder is moving back and forth, actually. So if you sum the rudder directions over the entire time series of movement, you won't actually see any movement. And so how can you figure out the causality of the skipper's actions with the direction of the boat? Really challenging, and I thought it was a really good analogy. Okay, Caleb, thank you. I'm also learning what you see, you can see, and you can't see. There's a bunch of stuff on my screen that you can't see, and there's certainly things that you can see, and so we're figuring it out. All right, so the first two sections, some of the quotes that I pulled out of here, his path to economics was not linear. He majored in English, and then that this book was written first and foremost for practitioners, and why it includes easy to download sets and programs. So for me in particular, and speaking a little bit from my experience, I actually really appreciated this introduction on two levels, as we have here. For myself, my path into statistics was not through a stats academic portion, and I like that he acknowledges that up front for two reasons. Again, one is I find it very encouraging for folks that have not necessarily gotten a stats master's or PhD that there is a way into this stuff, right? A lot of the times it can seem challenging if you try and read papers or even certain textbooks. It's written for somebody that has taken a stats PhD, so I like how he starts out at the beginning just with encouragement for anybody, and really opens it up and makes it clear that he was able to learn this stuff and that he's coming from an aspect where he's doing this stuff. It's one, actually, that first chapter, that first paragraph is what really got me into this text, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be approachable now. I haven't read the whole thing yet. That's what the book club is for, but I have a strong feeling that it'll be written in a style that's accessible by a lot of people. The second point is that it's written for practitioners. So in statistics, or even mechanical engineering or any field, I feel like there's sort of, two broad directions a textbook can go. Some of them become very technical, and they're written for people that are going to stay in academia and write proofs and papers and need to know the theory and all the pieces of it. That is all well and good. I think that's a very small subset of folks, though, that actually do the fundamental research in any field, whether that be my field of study, which is mechanical engineering, or even in statistics. But then I think there's a much broader audience of folks that are taking these theories and applying them. So this is not to say the theories aren't important. They're actually incredibly important to their foundation. But now you have this audience of people that need to understand how to utilize these theories in a way that's practical for them. So I think books for practitioners are great. That's why I ended up writing a book for practitioners myself. And I think there's a lot of practitioners that can do good in the world if they had these concepts. The other thing he points out is the easy to download data sets and programs. So something that I think for two reasons, actually I know for two reasons, I learn much more when I learn hands-on with computer programs than I do with math. And as we allude to the next section, which is a section on programming and statistics, on linear regression and probability, I never could really I could understand the probability rules if I read them, but then I would forget them. But now with computers, I can apply the probability rules with random simulations and things that I'll show in the next live stream. And that has worked for me. So I'm glad to see in this book that he has also taken the effort to include programs, which again will broaden the tools we have to learn causal inference. We'll have the text clearly. He has equations in his book, which are one or two in this chapter, and they're going to be more in the next chapter. But then we have the computer to actually apply the concepts, which I really, really like. So this was the key quote that I found from this chapter as a whole, that causal inference is the leveraging of theory and deep knowledge of institutional details to estimate the impact of events and the choices given an outcome of interest. I think this is the idea that's going to underlie the entire text and underlies, for me, why I'm trying to learn causal inference in my own life. So at this point, I know some of you have alluded to, I know Bayesian statistics, I know programming, I certainly just know averages and linear regression and all the basic stuff that you would expect somebody maybe to know from high school educations or college educations. But what still is really challenging to me, even in my current work, is this idea of causal inference. So did this particular action cause this particular event? And I personally would like to get better at two levels. One is understanding the theory of it. So as day to day I'm working through things, even if it's not mathematically, I can get a sense of what would a correct conclusion be, even qualitatively, of causal inference. And then, of course, I would also love to learn the mathematical tools. As a professional data scientist, I think causal inference is a valuable skill set to have mathematically and theoretically. And so this quote is exactly the thing that I would like to be able to do by the time I've read the book, and I think a lot of you would as well. So the next section was on optimization makes everything endogenous. I had to look up the word endogenous for sure. I hear it every now and then when you hear econometrics talk. Like I don't know if anyone knows Sean Taylor. He's a fairly prominent applied economist, econometrics. I have to figure out what the correct title is. But he's a very big guy in the data science field. He published the Facebook profit model and paper, and he drops this word in every now and then. So I didn't know what this meant, and I had to go look it up. We'll talk about that in a second. But the two quotes I had from this particular section, that the actual methods employed by causal designs are deeply dependent on theory and local institutional knowledge, and that prior knowledge estimated with causal effects are rarely believable. Prior knowledge is required to justify any claim of causal finding. So this brings up two other topics. Black box ML, when I was getting into statistics, when I decided to pick up statistics more and more on my own volitions rather than it just being forced on me through an education, which again, we'll talk about that in the next chapter, this black box ML thing was really picking up. So it was like neural networks, there was GBM, there was online competitions. And so I spent a long time trying to learn black box ML and applying it to the problems at my work, and it really just did not work at all. Black box ML has not been as very useful for me in my career and most of my problems. And I appreciate that he wrote here that the actual methods require you to know something about the place you're working or what you're doing. So it would be very hard for me to go into a hospital and apply causal inference right off the bat, because I've never worked in a hospital. I don't know things about surgery or cancer treatment or drug trials. And I appreciate, again, that he's calling out that you can't just, well, at least with causal methods, it'll be challenging to just go in and throw an XGBoost model at a medical problem and expect to get great results of causality between treatment and effect. The second one is that without prior knowledge, things can rarely be estimated. So a couple of people commented they hope this book club will be a little bit Bayesian, and I have to admit that being somebody who's very into Bayes' theorem, I like this for the Bayes' theorem side of it. So incorporation of prior knowledge from a domain, again, has been really useful. Outside of causality, and this not being a Bayesian book club, but I'll mention, being able to include prior knowledge about what I know is likely to be true from just domain expertise has been incredibly helpful in my career, and has been helpful actually not even just in the career, but in actually solving problems, because I can get to solutions much quicker with less data points. And this is another parallel that I'm actually pretty excited about, that I hope in the rest of this text, Scott is going to share how he uses his domain knowledge and prior expertise to get into problems. Yes, Fernando, we have not. When we get to the next chapter. I keep saying when we get to the next chapter. We'll talk about that. So then there was this example section, and I will admit I did not get very much from this section. So at a high level, I get the ideas that Scott had presented. That there's supply and demand curve. So I have the basic understanding from my econ class when I was in high school, and then just a little bit of reading that, supply goes up, prices tend to go down, and then as demand goes up, prices tend to go up. I guess gasoline prices, if you're anywhere in the world right now, are a good Econ 101 example. But then he had this example of price elasticity with these differential equations. And I don't know much about these equations. Yeah, so the good news is he says we're going to get into this later and he'll explain it. So maybe at that point I'll understand how causal inference applies to this price elasticity idea. I think it is a cool idea that maybe you take some sort of action and then you can see what happens to the price. And I do like that he's pointed out two forms of this model here, but I couldn't give you a very in-depth understanding or explanation of what went on. I'm excited to see this example later in the book, and to learn more from it. But it was, again, another data point that it feels like this book is going to be very heavy on expecting that you have an econ background. So I feel like we're going to have a lot of threads or topics in the discourse where us non-econ people could be learning from somebody who has an econ background. So if you have an econ background, please let us know. I hope you're part of this book club. We could definitely use your expertise to help us catch up with these topics a little bit quicker. Very last section was the conclusion. There wasn't too much to take out of the conclusion other than there's going to be a lot of code in this book, which I really appreciate. Annie, this is perfect. Annie is going to teach us all about econ. All right, I'm glad we have a couple people that know what this means. And Fernando, okay. Well, I'm going to learn a lot from you folks as we get to the more econ-heavy chapters, and there's words and concepts that I'm not so familiar with. For the conclusion section, I don't have a lot to say here. Scott presents that we're going to be using code in this book, Stata and R. I've never used Stata. I rarely use R. So I'm going to use Python. I hope that's not a surprise for many of you folks if you've read my book, but I really, really into Python. It's what I use day to day. So I'm going to use Python, but you can use whatever you like. Again, there's no programming war between one or the other. Whatever suits you, go ahead and do so and use that. There is Python code available for this book. A couple of people have transpiled it into standalone files for the code examples, and then collabs that have extra content in them. And so even if you don't know Python, actually, the second resource here with the teaching resources, we'll reference that. There's a lot of good stuff in that collab, and you don't actually have to run the collab. It's already there, pre-ran. So all the code is over here at this GitHub link, and the teaching resources will have more. I will post these slides in the Discourse, and I'll probably also link them in the YouTube description. so people can get to them. Let me look at the chat. Python hasn't spread yet. R is new for them. Stata was the default. Yeah, there seems to be this migration from SAS. In my field, mechanical engineering, there's a big continued migration from tools like MATLAB, which was the most popular tool, MATLAB, and then the open source version Octave, to NumPy and a lot of these things. So we're still in another decade later moving into open source tools. All right. So group discussion from Discourse. A couple of you folks have posted, which I, again, super appreciate. So let us flip over to that. I'm going to end this presentation. And we're going to get to this. So let me scroll up to the top. So first we'll go through Neil's comments. I know if Neil is here, or if you're here, feel free to type out maybe more in the chat box. This is the first point I'll say. In the future, what I'm going to do, I'm going to figure out how to do, is that for folks that want to jump on and present and talk about what they got live, like, you know, like sort of like a Zoom call or GVC or Google Video Call. You say GVC internally at Google. They'll be able to. So it'll be me paraphrasing somebody else's notes, but we're going to work towards figuring out a way where folks can jump on and do stuff. I'm glad Andy told me the sound is echoey. I will fix that in the next live stream. All right, so let me speak a little bit quieter, which hopefully will reduce the echo. All right, all my settings look good. Okay. So Neil had posted actually quite a bit here. He had posted, again, like me, one per section, and he goes through the backgrounds of all the folks that are have been referenced. So Neil is an awesome statistician. He's got a PhD from UCLA, super smart guy, and he's very well read. So these are the backgrounds of all the various folks that Scott mentions in the first chapter. And it's nice to see it was nice for me to click through a lot of these links and see more of the work that's foundational to this sort of book. So if you get a chance, go to Neil's comments and read through a couple of these. The PyData LA talk was quite a nice one from Judea Pearl, another great video format, watching him speak about the science of cause and effect. And then, of course, you can never get through anything without seeing something about Ronald Fisher and the p-values and everything like that. Quite important work. I don't want to say that, imply that it is not bad. All right, still pretty echoey. Give me a second. I'm going to do one quick thing to reduce the echo, and I will be back. Okay, hopefully the echo has reduced at least somewhat. Oof, sorry about all that. Trying to change the space a little bit to reduce the echo, but all right. I will figure out these technical details the next time around. Try and make things a little bit better. This is the first time I've done this again, so we will fix all this. For now, let me jump back to the group comments. So Neil pulled out a couple quotes from the book, which I also appreciate, and he's bolded the important things. I'm actually really glad he did this. So these are the things that I'm writing down that I will learn, and I hope you learn as well. So I've heard about the potential outcomes model quite frequently. It's actually in a lot of different textbooks. For the folks who are again interested in Bayesian stuff, there's a really good book by Gelman, Aki, and Jennifer Hill called Regressions and Other Stories. It actually may be the next book that we do for this book club. We'll see. But they cover the potential outcomes model in their book in a Bayesian framework, and they do quite a good job showing how to do that in R and BRMS, which is quite awesome. I've heard about, well, experimental design is a thing I know about, but I'm curious to see specifically what experiments are going to be presented in this book. And then matching and instrumental variables and synthetic controls are other topics. So thank you, Neil, for highlighting the specific things that you can say in an interview that you know once we are done with this book. The correlation versus causation, I think if you if you're here, you've probably heard about this. Again, self-selection bias. This is why we're doing this book. I think we are all really good at finding correlations. We can have our machine learning models do it. We can have scikit-learn do it. But the causation aspect is the really, really interesting bit, which we would definitively like to say we are able to do. So Neil points out clearly, like I did, using endogenous without defining it. So I have a sense that there's going to be a lot of words that some of us who don't have econ backgrounds are going to have to look up. And I felt good that Neil said this. I first read that chapter and I was like, oh, should I already know what endogenous means? Am I qualified to run this book club if I don't know what the words are? But I'm glad other people don't know what the words are. So we're all going to, again, learn together. So I won't go through all of these comments, but again, worth reading. Need to find a better mouse scroll. So Neil did pick out the important bits from the identifying price elasticity demand, describing the phenomenon of interest, and making falsifiable or testable predictions. Again, important skills that I'm interested in learning. Neil, you put your questions at the top. All right, I will scroll back up. Good to see that you're here. Exogeneity. Oh, exogeneity is the opposite of endogeneity, but again, another econ term thrown in that we all need to learn. And then the conclusion. So this actually was an important bit in the conclusion. I should have brought this up, but the relationship between two variables might be suggestive, but it might be not. Admittedly, this is my pet peeve when people write this, because this covers the full possible space of outcomes, so it's not really, I guess maybe it reinforces the point, but without actually teaching you much new. But these key assumptions are what I'm really interested in. So I'm really interested to see in other chapters, like Neil had put out here, that key assumptions are the important bit to this, but I don't actually know what those key assumptions are other than the one that was mentioned in this chapter. Let me scroll up to Neil's questions real quick. I don't know what your questions are, Neil, so if you want to put them into the chat, go ahead and do that. Then we can talk about them a little bit. I'm posting my notes here as well, I'm taking them in GitHub, and then I'll post them in Discourse, and then I also am keeping a glossary where of the terms that I don't know for my own reference. I won't go through my notes, but because we already have gone through my notes, but they are here for you as well. And then there were a couple of other questions or comments. So Ajay asks, that's right. I will go back to the thoughts for discussion then right after this one last point. So Ajay asks, does the absence of randomness imply that the relationship will not be causal? And so in the book, he does mention that right here. Scott mentions that the presence of randomness is crucial for identifying causal effects. Now, this is the first key assumption that I believe that he was alluding to. For me, this is really interesting that he mentioned this as well, because in a lot of the companies that I've worked at, I can't actually force randomness into the problem in my domain. So if we take SpaceX, for example, and let me flip over to my video so we can do full screen. So if we take SpaceX, for example, when I work there, there's not a lot of space to introduce randomness into the manufacturing supply chain. I can't randomly A/B test parts to see whether they will arrive late, or not expedite a part that's late to see whether it would have arrived on time, or, well, not expedite a part that we believe is going to be late because we haven't seen the outcome yet, to see whether the expedite would have helped or not. And expedite, by the way, means like speed up. So let's say you have a supplier that says they're going to deliver a part in 20 days. They can deliver it anywhere within that 20 days. They could deliver it the first day. They could deliver it on the 20th day. But then it turns out we actually need the part on the 10th day. A common thing in manufacturing is to pay the supplier more money so they'll deliver it to you faster. Maybe they'll put it on a faster shipping method, like a plane versus a truck. Or maybe they'll just bump it to the top of their priority queue and get it to you faster. But can't just randomly not do that if we need the part, because it'll delay the whole rocket. So I'm curious to see whether this randomness, again, let me flip back to the screen. Wrong one. I'm curious to see when we flip back to this, whether it's like forced randomness through experimental design, or whether you can take advantage of randomness that just happens to occur naturally in the situation that you're in. But to answer the question directly for Ajay, does the absence of randomness imply the relationship will not be causal? I don't think he says specifically that the absence of randomness means it's not causal, but he definitely says you need randomness to know whether it's causal. So it's going to be a very fine point that we figure out. And then ZS. A lot on the supply and demand model that we talked about, and I saw the chat, which I'll go through in a second. But whether causal inference is a motivation for sophisticated modeling strategies more generally. This is an important point too. Is it worth making an experiment more complex so you can get causal inference, make a causal inference assumption or not? I actually don't know. This is another thing I'm really curious about myself, because I want to know in my own work whether it'll be worth figuring out whether things are causal or not. Like, can I get away with correlation or assumptions just because that's good enough in the things I need to do? Or do I need to, spend that extra time as a statistician, or even extra money if it requires it from the company, to figure out a causal effect? And then I actually want to even understand whether the magnitude of that investment will be worth it. So something that I hope to learn out of this book for my own particular work. ZS also says that they use generative or mechanistic models, which are not all economics. I also tend to use generative models, so I'm curious to see later in this book whether discriminative models can be used in a causal inference framework. I'm pretty sure they can, but I don't want to make that claim, again, as a non-expert. And then going through the chat, I think the point of causal inference is to find ways to make causal claims even if random assignment is not possible. So Neil, I don't know actually. It may be that in causal inference you use random assignment and you as a tool to make causal inference, and then that there's other tools that don't require random assignment. I don't know because I haven't read the chapter yet, but my assumption is that that chapter on synthetic control is going to tell us more about that. I've heard more and more about synthetic control because, as the name implies, it's a fake control for what you're doing. So we're going to find out. And then Ben, thank you for this discussion. The term endogenous came out of left field. I super appreciate folks. I'm going to turn my video capture card on. I'll bring my video up here. Again, I think it's nice that a lot of us are mentioning this book club, that we're seeing things that we don't know before. I think it'll help folks just be more confident that we're not going to know everything that's written when we read it ourselves the first time, but when we read it together, we'll find comfort that other folks are maybe other folks are learning the same things that we're learning, and then as we have some of these experts here, they'll help us learn all together. Let's see here as well. So a good point here, and it talks a little bit about what we had alluded to earlier. If we don't see the wind direction and can influence it, we still see the boat moving a certain direction. But if we ask the sailor to randomize their movements, we potentially could see the causal effect that the randomized movements don't actually, that the randomization means they're not actually moving anywhere in the wind, but do we want to do that at the expense of the sailor not actually getting somewhere? Is it worth the sailor not getting somewhere for a period of time for us to understand that it is the sailor's rudder movements that are taking them a certain direction? All right. So with that, let me pause on the discussion that has occurred on the Discourse, and I'm going to move over to the chat. So Neil says, thoughts for discussion. Yes, I promised we would get back to Neil's thoughts for discussion, so let's get to that. I'll put that up. But going through the chat, you could just need an extra factory line. So yeah, but factory lines are very, very expensive. So there's actually two things to say here. There in manufacturing, you typically have the production line, which is like the process you don't mess with, and then you have the experimental section, where you have an extra factory line that you mess around with, and that's very, very common setup. And that's where you do your like when I did mechanical engineering, that's where you do your design of experiments with your experimentation grid and everything like that to figure out the optimal parameters for like heat and pressure or welding time to get what you need. The challenge is, though, is that you can't do that with your actual supply chain. So when you're building vehicles or oil tools or anything like that, it's really hard to randomize your actual supply chain because there's only one actual supply chain. So things become a little bit tricky there. Randomize the founder of Tesla. Yeah, we'll see if Elon keeps tweeting and doing stuff. maybe we'll get a randomization of the Tesla CEO in a couple of years. I'm not saying I know what'll happen, but certainly CEOs have been known to move from companies, so we'll find out. I missed the comment for if it's an experiment, then you don't need causal inference. I don't know, actually. I'm curious. Maybe I thought the point of an experiment in large part was to determine if you tweak a parameter, is something going to happen. That had been my sense of what statistical experimentation was, but again, let me know if I'm a little bit off base there. Keep going to the comments or the chat. I think the point of causal inference is to still make causal claims even if random assignment is not possible. We talked about that. Maybe it's a little bit broader. Maybe you have both tools where you can make causal inference claims if random assignment is possible, and then now with newer tools you can still make causal inference claims without randomization. Maybe if we change the theme from industry to public policy, the motivation will become clear. So this is something I'm hoping to learn in this book. I don't have a background in public policy. I've only worked in industry, typically manufacturing and business settings. So I'm excited for the examples that he alluded to, which will be in public policy. Neil had posted on the abortion versus crime rate paper, which again is a pretty famous paper in the sense it gets a lot of publicity outside of the traditional public, the traditional like academic space. It's mentioned in Stephen Levy's book, I believe, and his podcast. And it also just is a fairly big claim, right? And it is a large thing to say. So hopefully we learn more about that example or other examples like it later in this book. Going through Caleb's comments, there are ML methods such as T-Learner where you're trying to estimate conditional average treatment effects. And then comparing means we would estimating average treatment effects. So Caleb seems to know a lot about causal inference. Caleb, I'm going to go read about T-Learner. I'm actually going to Google it right after this book club to see what that's all about. I might tag you on a post in Discourse and ask you more questions. The way that I see it, Nihil says, the way that I see it is you can do real experiments. If you can do real experiments, do so if you want to make causal claims. If you can't, find ways to mitigate the effect of selection bias to make better causal claims. Interesting. I'm going to be in the latter camp. I can't always do randomization, but with that, I think we've made it through all of the current chat. I'm going to flip back to Neil's comments because I promised. I got two screens here. When you see me looking one way or another, I'm pulling up one screen or another. So Neil had brought up 2 points for discussion. Cunningham calls out correlation is not equal to causation, which alludes to causal assumptions. So causal models are stronger assumptions than statistical models. What is it we're trying to do that merits more assumptions? I'll give you my take because I'm a little bit ahead. I think the stream is slightly delayed. I don't know what it is that we're trying to do that merits more assumptions, to be quite honest. Neil, when you posted this, did you have a sense of what you were looking for? Again, pausing to wait for the stream to catch up. This is going to be an experiment in how long the stream delay is between me talking and you guys getting it. Okay. Neil says there's 2 slides, causal assumption and causal claims. Keep getting him confused. This is actually a really good point, and I'm really glad he mentioned that. I'm gonna add that over here. The assumptions you need for causality and the claims you can make. I don't actually know, and this alludes actually a lot to some of the chats that we've had earlier. What does it take to make a causal claim, both in experimental design and assumption-wise, whether it be randomization or forced randomization through experimental design or whatever other form of randomization we're going to see later in this book. As Fernando says, to make causal claims, you need some specific assumption. I'm going to, again, be really, really curious later in the book how these assumptions are justified. Again, part of this learning here, I don't actually know specifically what it takes to have a airtight causal inference claim, and it's something that I'm looking to get out of this book club. Neil's second comment, and then, by the way, the reason I'm reading these out loud is that for folks that are watching this live stream and are using the closed captioning, when I read them out loud, the Google AI will create captions for those who need them. Statistics is often taught as a toolbox or recipes. The table of contents and list of topics in the intro feel like that a bit disconnected, but Cunningham alludes to, foreshadows more epistemology that maybe ties it all together. So this is also a question I have, is this book going to be more a set of toolbox or recipes that we just apply and we can do our causal claims in, say, the public policy space that had been mentioned earlier in the chat, or whether he's going to talk more about the thought process behind them. I think both are really important, to be quite honest. As a statistician, knowing how to run the equations mechanically with code and plugging them in, of course, is important in getting the result. But I'm really hoping that this book will also have much more about the ideas around statistics. So something that's been useful for me is, even if I don't always, like, say, run a Bayesian model, for instance, the idea of how Bayesian thinking works, or even how neural networks or some of these black box models work, helps inform just my overall qualitative thought process. So I'm hoping to get a lot of qualitative learning. And so we're going to see, I have faith that we're going to do this, because he does, in this first introduction, he does spend a lot of time explaining the thought process and how to think about causal inference more than just telling you what it is. So more to come there. All right, so Neil says, especially the methods he listed, many of them were developed specifically in response to other tools viewed as deficient. It's interesting to see Rubin and Pearl style in one book. Not being an econ person, I sort of noticed this trend as well. I want to talk a little bit about econ drama here that I'm not super a part of, but it seems like there is like 2 tracks of work. There are folks that are like in Judeo-Pearl's like do calculus style, and then there's others who don't go for that. Clearly, Judeo-Pearl was making an argument that a field needed to move more towards one style. So I'm, like Neil, really interested to see if this book is going to bring it all together. And I think, like he mentions in the earlier chapters, there's not quite one book that brings it all together. So maybe this will be the textbook that covers it all. Yet another reason I thought this textbook would be the one that would be most useful for us in this book club versus others maybe that had a perspective in maybe, so let's say, one lane. So we have a lot of priors about the idea of what's going to happen in this book and cannot in proper experiment, I believe that the ideas of quasi-experiment is what ties the methods in this book together. Yes, I'm really, really interested to see that. I'm realizing one thing I need to do for these next live streams, and I will retroactively do this, is I'm going to make a list of all these questions that we have collectively as a group that we hope to see later on in the book. I actually am going to start a thread on Discourse just for this explicit purpose and ask you folks to post on that. So then we have a record of what we were expecting to learn or what we were hoping to learn, and when we get to the end of the book club, we'll see whether we got there or not. Let me flip back to the slides real quick. Turn off this one and jump back into these. So let's go through what's next. First off, before I get there, thank you so much for this discussion. This is actually turning out to be quite awesome. I wasn't sure how many people would come up and how much discussion we get, but so far I see that we have multiple threads of chat and people are challenging each other, and that is actually really cool. I'm really thrilled that this is happening. Again, I'm sorry you're restricted to the chat window for now, and you really have to just type things in on the fly, and it's a little bit asynchronous. Well, a little bit disconnected where I'm talking, and then it takes a little bit to get to you. But we are going to fix that in the next live stream. So let's talk about what's next. Join the Discourse if you have not. Whoops, I have a typo there. If you have not joined the Discourse, go ahead and do so. I think there actually is a lot of discussion there already, and there's going to be more to come. I mean, I'm going to jump on Discourse right after this and post a bunch of questions for you folks. Definitely introduce yourself. We have a lot of people with different backgrounds. I think mine is from industry, of course, so you're seeing that tilt. But I've learned a lot about folks over here, from Annie having an econ background and other folks mentioning what they have done previously as well. So go ahead and do that. Share where you're from. Share what your path has been to this book club. And then I did another thing. I created a thread where you can share a commitment to read this chapter. Let's run an experiment in self-selection bias, that if you self-select to read this chapter, do you actually end up reading this chapter? So go ahead, post that what you're hoping to get from this probability and regression review. Let me flip my screen up. Share what you're expecting to get from the probability and regression review, and whether that's just a brush up on learning concepts that or refreshing concepts that you've already known, but dusting off some of those cobwebs, or whether some of these concepts are just new to you and you're really looking to learn the particular perspective. I am really interested to go in and dive in again about the frequentist view of linear regression and statistical experimentation, and get that from a different perspective, so I can gain a better understanding of statistics as a whole. So that's something that I'm looking forward to when I go through and make my detailed notes. We're going to do the next one of these on June 26th. That's 3 weeks from now. So I hope that's enough. That's enough time. Let's fix this one for now. For me, June is a little bit busy, so I got to do it on June 26th. In the future, I'll take a poll and see what works best for people in terms of days and time zones, so we can randomize this a little bit, some forced randomization, so everybody can join. The last thing is the next chapter has much more code and math, so be sure to actually write it out and do that either on paper or in a computer to reinforce your understanding. And so this is where I would have done the live Q&A, but we already did a little bit of that. So let me pause here, and I'll just turn my full screen on. If folks have questions, maybe particularly for me on this live stream, because I'm the only one that can talk through video, let me know. If you have questions for others, feel free to post them in the chat as well. It's just an open session now. I'm going to go through the chat again myself because I saw a lot of messages as I was reading. So what I'm seeing here, Ruben is a Bayesian too sometimes. Yes, I know he published the 8 schools model paper, I believe, that every PPL package has to show when they're showing that their probabilistic programming language works. Thanks for mentioning causal approaches. I've been reading more about Perl, so reading things outside that confuse me. Yeah, that is something that I'm hoping to learn from this book as well. There do seem to be like the Judea-Pearl style of thinking of due calculus and all of that in his Book of Why, and then everything else, I don't actually even know enough about all the other stuff to even know if there's a split. So I'm very interested to see what is going on. Caleb says it's been proven that Rubin and Perl frameworks are mathematically equivalent. So I think, so that is good. I think which gives me some confidence that we're learning one thing. That'll be nice. But it'll be good to understand maybe the different pathways they took to get to the same conclusion. Potential outcomes versus DAG model. Yeah, I agree with Neil. There seems to be a lot of discussion in the econ space about which one is better or which is the right way to think about it. Even on Twitter these days, I see folks going on, that's a new academic space to argue about stuff. So even on Twitter, I've seen folks sort of go at it about potential outcomes and directed acyclical graphs. So we're gonna see. Ben asks, are conditional average treatment effects a subset of heterogeneous treatment effects? Yeah, that is a question for Caleb. I'm glad he tagged him because I don't actually know. I'm curious to see what the answer is. I actually wonder if it's possible for me to bring up the chat. This is gonna be a whole thing here. I don't know, but I'm gonna figure that out for later. All right. Another thing I'm going to learn is that if I stop this live stream, does it cut off the chat? I'm not quite sure. But let me first start. For the live Q&A, are there any other questions or anything else more that we want to discuss while we have this synchronous channel open? And I'll give it a moment again because I know that it takes a couple seconds for this to get to you. Going once, going twice, going thrice. Okay. I don't see anything coming in, so I want to say thank you so much, everybody, for coming to this. This has been much more wonderful than I even expected. In so many ways, I'm very, very excited that so many things are happening here between all the channels that we have going. I feel like this is a really strong start to what's going to be a really, really cool book club. It seems like we're all going to learn a lot. We all learned a lot clearly in the last 54 minutes that we've been here. I've learned a lot from you speaking, and it seems like even between the group that folks are learning a lot. So I hope you make a commitment to read the next chapter with us over the next 3 weeks so we can come back and do this again. I'll personally make a commitment to fix these echoes and any of these technical issues, get better at my stream changing, and then I definitely want to figure out one of the platforms that lets one of you folks come on. So I'm hoping next time we will be able to bring a couple of you folks on here. So either you and I can have a discussion in a Q&A format one-on-one, or maybe we can bring let's say Ben, Caleb, and anyone else who wants to come on live and chat, so it feels more like a social book club rather than me just talking to you. But with that, I will end this live stream. I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday, and I'll see you asynchronously on Discourse. And I will be sending out mailers on the mailing list with additional details, and then we will chat again in 3 weeks. Adios.